The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency James Marape, Prime Minister and Minister for Bougainville Affairs of the independent state of Papua New Guinea. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency James Marape, Prime Minister and Minister for Bougainville Affairs of the independent state of Papua New Guinea. I invite him to address the General Assembly.
His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Sahid, the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, fellow leaders, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinguished honor and pleasure on my own behalf and that of my 8 million plus people and government to join other global leaders in addressing the General Assembly today. I also take this time to extend our condolences to the families in your countries, including my own country, who have lost loved ones due to COVID-19, and our get well wishes to those who are sick. I also pay tribute to the global frontline workers and service personnel who have toiled over and beyond the call of duties to care for those who are sick and vulnerable, especially our medical workers. Mr. President, this being my first attendance at this global forum, I am greatly humbled and warmly congratulate you and the government and people of the Republic of Maldives on your mandate, particularly as a small island developing state, to lead our collective work this session. This is compounded by the intensifying and worrisome global climate crisis, accelerated by biodiversity losses and other humanitarian, peace, security, and trade-related issues that poses great challenges to the way we now manage our regional and global and socio-economic affairs. Despite all these challenges, we are heartened by your foresight, commitment, and leadership under your Presidency of Hope, Vision, and TAM. We pledge our total support to you and offer our partnership during your tenureship as President of this August Forum. Mr. President, I also thank your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, and the delegation of Turkey for his excellent leadership and outstanding work this past year, under, of course, very challenging circumstances. We wish him and his family all the very best. I want to place on record Papua New Guinea's deep appreciation and support to our friend, the Secretary General of United Nations, His Excellency Guterres, for his continuing bold and decisive leadership of work for our United Nations in as far as the United Nations mandate and charter is concerned. Mr. Secretary General, your unanimous reappointment for another term starting next year is indeed a clear demonstration of the confidence and trust the United Nations member states, including my own country, have in your work ethics, your strong leadership, which this organization needs at this very challenging period. I thank you for your frank and sobering assessment of the challenges before us and your proposals on how we confront these challenges practically and at multilateral levels. Mr. President, I bring to you all greetings from Papua New Guinea in the blue, peaceful Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean, or the blue Pacific continent, is home to marine and terrestrial biodiversity and is where the most vulnerable small island states are being exposed to the global threats of rise in sea level due to climate change and the health and the associated economic woes brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. I speak for Papua New Guinea, of course, but the issues will no doubt resonate with the small island states, including those of my Pacific brothers and sisters. I also believe, Mr. President, that you too will have some appreciation on what these issues are, because you come from a small island state yourself. Our ocean homes and our way of life is intertwined with the coastal ecosystem in its natural equilibrium. This equilibrium is now affected by human influence, and for us small island states, not in our making. But we are the first victims and the most affected because of our inherent vulnerabilities. Mr. President, as we convene and continue to speak on climate change in the ambiences of our 21st century, post-halls like this August United Nations Assembly, may I remind us all that little children and their families who are living in the seas of earth are living in fear and uncertainty of what their future will be like. This is because in their lifetime they have seen their arable and safe lands lost due to sea level rise and are watching as the structures that their lives are built upon slips away. It is time the big carbon emitters of planet Earth own up and apologize to small island states and all other victims of climate change. And I make this statement with no apologies. And today I make a call for all of us, and especially to the big carbon-emitting nations who are now enjoying their national economic transformations through industrialization, to pause, think, and take responsibility to save our planet. I am comforted by the recent commitment by President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the respective nations' intention to respond better to tackling climate change issues. Mr. President, I also hear of China's positive response and note that it is good we are now uniting to save our planet. We have a collective responsibility to take actions to save Earth. Mr. President, when astronaut Neil Armstrong walked on the moon on July 20, 1969, he would have looked back to the direction where he came from. And I assume that he would not have seen his beloved home state, the United States of America. He would have seen his home planet, planet Earth. It is the survival of Earth that we must now take action. I want to make this statement. Enough of talk. We have to take actions commensurate to the volume of emissions from our industries. Leaders of the big carbon-emitting nations must now lead the global effort in rebalancing the environmental equilibrium. It is a hard ask, but really a necessary call for leadership and champions. I point to all nations on earth to embrace the unity of humanity to save our planet, because what happens in Africa will and does affect Europe. Whatever happens in Asia will affect America, and whatever happens in the Middle East will affect those of us in the Pacific, and vice versa. We live in one planet, one atmospheric envelope, one interlinked environmental ecosystem. Hence, as one humanity, we must rise and unite to preserve our one planet, our home. Not to do so is foolishness, and we are doing so at the peril of our children and their children, if, of course, Jesus Christ doesn't come back soon. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea recognizes the need to save Earth, and we too are contributing and will contribute to preserve our Earth. God has blessed Papua New Guinea with about 13% of world's tropical rainforest and 6% of its biodiversity. These global assets we want to preserve. One lesson I have learned from the COVID-19 experience is that oxygen is, number one, human need. With less oxygen, and COVID-19 has shown us that, an individual suffocates and dies. Well, you ask this question, who produced the oxygen for Mother Earth? The trees, of course. If the world's rainforest reservoir were a global lung, we in Papua New Guinea have a significant proportion of this organ that keeps the world breathing. We also function as a great carbon sink. We have this significant asset for our planet. And I, as chair of the Coalition of Rainforest Nations, Papua New Guinea stands at an important crossroad. We are a net remover of the carbon from the atmosphere. The removal capacity from our forests is over 100 million tons per year. Our energy emissions at present is really around 10 million a year. Therefore, if the READ Plus mechanisms delivers as it should be, Papua New Guinea can remain where every country needs to be by 2050 under the Paris Agreement, a net remover of carbon from the atmosphere. The preservation and conservation plus sustainable harvest and use of forest resources can be our commitment to you all for the upkeep of Earth, heading the red code humanity that was called by our good Secretary General Guterres. The recent Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change Sixth Assessment Report is crystal clear that human actions are the cause of the worsening climate crisis. We must take action to change this trajectory. We have long said that climate change is serious, it's a very serious existential threat to our national security and well-being. Therefore, the climate security nexus reality must and cannot continue to be denied by the Security Council, as it would be dereliction of duty to all people worldwide on the part of the Council. We welcome the increasing support of the Council on this important agenda. Mr. President, let me also welcome and commend the excellent leadership and efforts by the United Kingdom as COP26 President-designate, Italy also as the co-host of COP26, and the United Nations Secretary General in rallying the international community to take bold decisions and practical measures necessary to deliver on the Paris Agreement commitments. I cannot overstate the urgency and the ambitious actions needed under the Paris Agreement to undo the serious damage humanity has caused to planet Earth. I will also continue to advocate strongly that responsibility must be assigned correctly, appropriately, and proportionately to the scale of damages done. Mr. President, during COP26, I will be seeking to progress a number of issues on behalf of Papua New Guinea and the wider Pacific Blue economy. We must all commit to the energy targets, deal with the land use, and advocate for the preservation of biodiversity and be more bold in climate financing commitments. These issues, which are important to Papua New Guinea and the Pacific Island Forum countries, and we will be seeking support and advocacy from developed and industrialized countries to back our domestic and regional efforts towards adaptation and mitigation through global funding assistance. I will be seeking and understanding to build a special set of criteria that is simplified to enable us to qualify for financial support for adaptation and mitigation strategies. Mr. President, I join the previous speakers in calling on the international community to collectively meet our Paris Agreement obligations and submit individual, nationally determined contributions without delay. Papua New Guinea was amongst the first countries to submit our NDC in 2020, outlining our goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. This plan includes drafting of our NDC plans, implementation plan rather, regulation and alignment of NDC adaptation and the National Adaptation Plan, thanks to the support we received from the United Nations Development Programme. We want to see our major carbon emitters in the industrialized nations to be very genuine and committed in their actions to fund climate change mitigation and adaptation. Our failure in that regard is a denial of that responsibility. We wish to advocate also that the $100 billion annual commitment by developed countries to the developing nations on climate financing must be considered different from official development assistance. This will allow its guidelines to be sensitive to the climate change mitigation and adoption agenda and their specific requirement. For Papua New Guinea as a natural gas and oil exporting country, we are working towards ensuring our carbon footprints is minimized by implementing our Sustainable Development Goal 13, Roadmap 2020 to 2030 on climate change, launched last year. However, despite the multiple project submissions for climate financing, Mr. President, Papua New Guinea has had little or limited success in accessing these funds, except for technical assistance in developing the fiduciary framework. This is quite disappointing, Mr. President. We need to see a more practical demonstration of genuine commitments. Other forms of assistance towards climate change adaptation and mitigation must also be streamlined to lessen the increasing debt burdens in small island states to free up the required fiscal space to support the economic recovery efforts from the COVID-19 pandemic and achieve sustainable development. I've had a call on member states to finalize a robust and fair carbon markets under the Paris rulebook to unlock a new financing stream that better accounts for the sustainable development interests of countries like my own. This will allow us to assign our development agenda under the different but appropriate financing opportunities, as long as the guidelines are appropriate but friendly to us. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea wants to achieve both conservation and development. In forestry, we have ceased issuance of new timber permits and renewal of existing ones and will achieve complete round log export ban by 2025. We want to move into value-adding and downstream processing. We have adopted and designated a large conservation area in one of our provinces, Northern Province to be exact, as a pilot program in partnership with a regional environmental program, which will give us the learning experience we need for further designations of conservation areas. We are also in the process of establishing NDC roadmap for agriculture, forestry, and other land use and energy sector. Mr. President, COVID-19 will continue to remain our biggest challenge. Our numbers are low in terms of both confirmed cases and fatalities at the moment. And one of the most concerning for us in Papua New Guinea is the rate of vaccinations, which is quite low. Our government took up necessary upfront ownership through the enactment of an appropriate legislation in our national parliament, which we call the National Pandemic Act in 2020. This, together with very close working partnership with our valued development partners, including our Pacific family of nations through the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway on COVID-19 program, has given us much success. We cannot speak highly enough of such partnerships, including those through the COVAX facility and with the United Nations system, Australia, New Zealand, USA, Japan, China, European Union, UK, and the United Arab Emirates, which enable us to have immediate access to essential medical equipment and supplies, including the AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines. We continue to welcome and encourage further strengthening of cooperative global efforts to allow access to the COVID-19 vaccines in countries where they are most needed. We advocate for global efforts in curbing misinformation that has resulted in low rates of vaccinations in our country, especially the Facebook misinformations that keep on going on in public space. It will truly support our efforts in building national advocacy and awareness in the efficacy and safety of COVID-19 vaccines, a program ably supported by our development partners, including mostly notable the churches and the United Nations Country Office. We have to do all do all of that while keeping a very close eye on the general health sector of our country, because we cannot afford to lose sight of the other aspects of health in our country. Our National Health Plan is ready to be launched, except for the settlement of the financing plan that matches our health plan. It will encompass facility development, capacity building, pharmaceutical procurement, and development of primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare, as well as building our provincial capacities and the requisite capacity building and education in as far as the health sector is concerned. Mr. President, economic management for us involves taking stock of where we were and building the right structures for re-engagement with our international partners, and ensuring that right enablers are put in place to build and sustain a robust economy. It involves taking stock of our debt portfolios, reprioritizing our expenditures, and focusing on important reforms in the utility sector, infrastructure, education, health, and of course, our natural resources. It also involved taking a closer look at specific projects in the extractive industry and working with their proponents to see them come on stream. And for the last 2 years, the bulk of our effort was to ensure that we achieved really a fine balance between the adherence to our COVID-19 protocols and requirements, but at the same time trying to find a balance between ensuring that our economy was opened and was functioning. Our work in the transparent stocktake of our debt portfolios have resulted in attracting strong support from the World Bank, from the IMF, and has provided important platform for support from our bilateral partners like Australia and Japan, and for this we are truly very, very grateful. We acknowledge the support to us at this important time when COVID has hit us and our economy is struggling. We continue to advocate for the use of our natural resources, but the foundational tenet is that the development of these resources are to be done on the premises that all stakeholders have a shared interest in these developments. And these interests are to be fully satisfied within principles of equity and equality, where we leave no one behind, especially a country like mine, which has many different ethnicities that own a parcel of land in our country. A key area of focus is the substantive investment and development of quality economic infrastructures to link the provinces throughout my country and deliver important services to all our citizens countrywide and enhance their socio-economic opportunities. We have embarked on a very important Connect PNG program, which is trying to connect a rural Papua New Guinea together into one another, which is building and expanding key infrastructure and assets, such as national roads, wharves, jetties, airports, airstrips, and punching new road corridors and information and telecommunication network and electricity access to the majority of our population. This is the stimulus for economic transformation of our people. This is done as required by our national constitution, and for those who might need to know, Papua New Guinea was only independent as late as 1975. And this is totally in alignment with our National 8-Point Plan, our PNG Vision 2050, our Development Strategic Plan 2010 to 2030, our Medium-Term Plan 3, 2018 to 2022, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to better deliver socio-economic prosperity for the country. And we hope by this we would become a middle-income earning country by 2050. Mr. President, growth for PNG continues to be off at the back of our petroleum and energy and the mining sector, which contributes around 60% of our gross domestic product. We continue to advocate for these developments to take place and do as much as we can and as hard as we can to advocate for important policies in those sectors. Our policies on developments in the extractive sector has begun to be cognizant of the diminishing financing envelope from external sources such as loans and grants. At the same time, we have had to move towards better management of our national public debt. We strongly recognize the importance of generating sufficient revenue from our own domestic sources to complement external budget support for our national development priorities. As you would know, Mr. President, the General Assembly 2030 agenda and the Addis Ababa Financing Development Framework calls for such. And it is in this spirit that my government has embarked on reviewing and reforming our legislation and policies in the resource sector to ensure appropriate levels of national content in projects and facilitate fair and equitable returns for all stakeholders with shared interests. At the same time, we continue to value and respect and uphold our partnership obligations with the private sector in our natural resource sector. And Mr. President, may I say we remain open for business and therefore welcome bona fide international investors to join us in exploring opportunities that are still available in my country. Mr. President, my country continues to enjoy partnership with important multilateral financial institutions. Let me take a moment to thank the World Bank. I thank IMF, I thank ADB, and of course our valued bilateral partners, including Australia, New Zealand, Japan, China, India, European Union, the United States, for supporting my government's development priorities. It would be remiss of me not to also acknowledge the excellent work undertaken under the leadership of the Prime Ministers of Canada and Jamaica and the United Nations Secretary General for financing for development needed particularly in developing countries to recover and build back from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our call Papua New Guinea strongly supports. Mr. President, my government has prioritized in investing in the agricultural sector as an engine of economic growth and prosperity for our country. The strategic interventions are a combination of credit scheme that we've engaged upon, freight and price subsidy for our rural farmers, which has helped broaden the scope and reach the agricultural production sites in our country. This will not only help broaden the tax base and generate additional revenue the country needs for development, but also, more importantly, improve our rural communities and their livelihood and enable them to be proactive in as far as our nation building is concerned. Our largely rural-based economy is dependent on subsistence agriculture. It is my government's desire to transform the agriculture sector into a reliable, commercial and sustainable food system that will address food security and climate resilience, as well as conservation and management of our vast biodiversity. To support this, we have set targets to increase cash crop production by 30% and also increase livestock production by 30% by 2025 and develop taxation incentives for our local farmers. Additionally, this includes the formulation of an agriculture and livestock diversification plan by 2025 and our efforts to increase downstream processing by 30% in 2025 and ensure local landowners and provincial governments participate in the equity sharing and downstream business and the spin-offs that are associated with it. Mr. President, our efforts in the agricultural sector ties in well with the important global efforts under the United Nations Food System Summit convened virtually yesterday by the United Nations Secretary General. For Papua New Guinea, we have identified 5 key priority actions that forms our national pathway to transform our food systems in ways that will build a sustainable, equitable, resilient and healthier food system in our country. These details were shared in our national statement at the Food System Summit yesterday evening. However, I would underline that my country, with its arable and abundant land, has the potential to serve as a food basket for Asia-Pacific region and beyond, particularly at a time when food security around the world is now being threatened by the ravages of climate change, sea level rise, and the other crises. We therefore welcome multi-stakeholder partnership and investment to transform our organic food systems to address the global challenges relating to hunger, poverty, malnutrition, food security that fosters better health outcomes for our people and the communities and to deliver on the SDGs. Mr. President, in the energy sector, we recognize the importance of energy transition to renewable sources to move significantly away from fossil fuels and to options including hydro, solar, wind, and geothermal energy. We also have options to clean gas energy. Our government has, since 2018, under the auspices of the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, we have been working with our development partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and USA to be exact, on the Papua New Guinea electrification program. This is intended to provide reliable and affordable renewable energy to over 70% of the unreached households in our country by 2030. Enormous development outcomes right on this program for our people. We have struck partnership with the International Solar Alliance and International Renewable Energy Agency. And let me also say private sector has come on board, the Fortescue Metal Group, the subsidiary, the Fortescue Future Industries, to strengthen our renewable energy transformation options in geothermal and hydropower energy space. Our energy transformation will come about when the National Energy Authority is fully established. It is a very strategic act we took on early this year to separate the regulatories from the responsibilities from the generation of power, and we hope that in the not too distant future, this authority of ours will regulate the energy space to allow for facilitate more investments and developments into the different energy, especially the clean energy sources that we advocate. Mr. President, we want to recapitalize on the energy space and to ensure that clean energy becomes Papua New Guinea's main driving force. Mr. President, the virtual first ever high-level dialogue on energy convened today by yourself or the Secretary General to accelerate efforts in implementing the SDG 7 on energy-related goals and targets for sustainable development is the most timely and needed in as far as Papua New Guinea is concerned. It resonates very well with my government development priority, and we look forward to harnessing the 10-year action plan under the global roadmap to attain SDG 7 by 2030 and further explore joining an energy compact to support SDG 7 achievement by 2030, emissions by the year 2050. Mr. President, as a maritime nation with a maritime zone spanning over 2.4 million square kilometers, the ocean agenda is of immense importance to my country, and not only for the living and non-living resources, but for the value added they bring to our national assets, but also, more importantly, for our own identity and our own way of life as a people and nation of the seas. My government is also prioritizing and strengthening the management, the governance, and security of our maritime zones under our National Oceans Policy 2020 to 2030, which was adopted in July 2020. To further complement this, my government also officially launched last year our 10-year National Fisheries Strategic Plan 2021 to 2020, which provides the roadmap and vision for a broad-based fisheries sector and industry that is inclusive and environmentally sustainable and globally competitive and promotes food security. Furthermore, it addresses issues including prevention of illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing in our country and the neighboring Pacific waters. And it also talks about domestic downstream processing that enables our people as resource owners to be meaningfully involved in the economic opportunities our sea resources brings. We call on countries within our region to be responsible in that regard. Mr. President, I am pleased to say that my government adopted and launched the country's Marine Protected Areas Policy and the National Action Plan of Action for stingrays, skates, and sharks in June 2021. This policy will strengthen our efforts to better protect our marine resources because we are an epicenter for global marine resource and biodiversity. We are grateful for the support from the Global Environmental Facility and UNDP as valued development partners. In doing so, this will assist us to reach the biodiversity target 11, to have 17% of our terrestrial and inland water areas and 10% of our coastal and marine areas protected, which we remain committed to. It is in this context, and also with the devastating wildfires and catastrophic climate change events around the world impacting adversely on biodiversity, that we look forward to a successful outcome of the 15th Conference of Parties of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity that will be staged in China next month. We therefore join the growing global call for an ambitious and transformational post-2020 global biodiversity framework that can help us implement fully our national commitments to protect biodiversity and sustainably use them for our sustainable development and also meeting the SDGs. Mr. President, regionally, I am pleased to join my fellow leaders of the Pacific Island Forum in heralding our milestone regional declaration on preserving our maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise, which was adopted last month. As large states within our blue Pacific continent and the advent of the devastation consequences of the runaway climate change and the rising sea level rise that continues to threaten our countries and the people's security and lives and livelihoods and sovereignty, this declaration preserves our maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. It also upholds the integrity of our long-standing commitment to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas as the global legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. We therefore welcome the support of all United Nations member states and the international community to our landmark declaration. My earlier remark on climate change gives us the basis to call for those support and actions. Mr. President, in terms of peace building, my government recognizes the fundamental role the United Nations plays in supporting sustainable development and peace building. It is therefore incumbent on the United Nations to ensure that we continue to adopt the existing multilateral arrangements, including the United Nations Peace Building Architecture, the Security Council, the Peace Building Commissions, and the Secretary General's Action for Peace Initiative and the Peace Building Fund to make them relevant under evolving global circumstances to better foster and sustain global, regional, national peace and security. For us, our continuing engagements with the Peace Building Commission and the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund in recent years, and from which we have been beneficiary, further strengthens the hand of national peace and security through peace by peaceful means. This is especially true on our Bougainville Peace Agreement process for our Bougainville region and in the new initiative on peace building and sustaining peace in our two other provinces in my country. Mr. President, I am pleased to announce the Bougainville peace process continues to remain a top priority of my government. In this context, I would like to inform this August Hall that following the referendum in 2019, my government and the autonomous Bougainville government have held the second post-referendum consultation and the joint supervisory board just 3 months ago, where several very important decisions to move the peace process forward were agreed upon. This included the reaffirmation of both parties to our commitment to the Bougainville Peace Agreement, the importance of a peaceful dialogue on the way forward, guided by the country's constitutional and parliamentary processes, including the respect to the outcome of the 2019 referendum, which includes the agreement to transfer all agreed powers and a joint roadmap to guide the post-referendum process. Mr. President, there is a clear recognition by both parties that much more work remains to be done in this critical phase, and that constructive dialogue, our mutual understanding and partnership is crucial for a lasting political settlement to the autonomous region of Bougainville. And let me place on record my appreciation for United Nations in their help and leadership or assistance on the Bougainville issue that faces Papua New Guinea. My government is also realistic about the capacity challenges and successful peace building and in our efforts to sustaining peace. The continued support and partnership of the Peace Building Commission, the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund, and the wider United Nations system and other development partners will be vital to ensure dividends of peace is shared and becomes long-lasting. I do acknowledge the strong support by the United Nations in chairing the consultation process and the supporting initial engagement of a moderator for these talks to take place. I would also like to put on record our sincere appreciation to our valued bilateral and multilateral development partners, and again including Australia, European Union, Japan, China, Germany, Ireland, New Zealand, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the entire United Nations systems for their continuing commitment and support towards the Bougainville peace process and the recent initiative in the two provinces in the Highlands part of our country to look forward to a better work with all development partners on this important priority that my government is undertaking. Whilst commenting on the United Nations on the peace effort in Papua New Guinea, I would also like to recall the Pacific Island Leaders Forum decision in 2019 and the outstanding visit by United Nations Human Rights Mechanism to address the alleged human rights concerns in our regional neighborhood. This visit is very important to ensure that the greater peoples of the region have peace within their respective sovereignties and their rights and cultural dignities are fully preserved and maintained. Mr. President, we also have long recognized that our sustainable development efforts will be in vain if we do not safeguard our women and girls in their human rights and preservation of the dignity and provide them opportunities to be equal development partners for nation building. This is why my government has prioritized gender equality and empowerment opportunities with policies, laws, and strategies, and we have set in place, among others, the Gender-Based Violence Strategy from 2016 to 2025 and the Family Protection Act, and provided that this demographic segment of our economy specific economic opportunities to be engaged in entrepreneurial activities to empower our women and our girls. This initiative takes into account of all our international commitments and obligations under relevant international frameworks, notably the Beijing Platform for Action. We recognize that much work remains to be done, but we are determined and committed to do what is right for our women and our girls, as our country's future prosperity and security also depends on how we treat them today and into the future. This is clearly demonstrated recently by the groundswell of support to combat and end the scourge of gender-based violence in the country. I am pleased to note that this year, my government, with the support of the parliamentarians to end gender-based violence, established by Partition Special Parliamentary Committee on Gender-Based Violence to inquire into gender-based violence in the country and propose recommendations and measures to combat and end the scourge of gender-based violences. A report of this important work has been tabled in Parliament, and we are working towards implementing it. This will complement the work done under a European Union-led and United Nations supported Spotlight Initiative for Ending Violence Against Women and Children, which was jointly launched when the United Nations Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina Mohammed, in March of 2020, visited Port Moresby. I really want to thank Her Excellency for this visit. It was not only a visit to the capital city, but she did step out into rural Papua New Guinea. We are also embarking on the administrative measures for quotas for women representation in our national parliament. The inadequate representation of women in parliamentarian is a continuing concern for us in Papua New Guinea. We are optimistic to set in motion this initiative at our next general election scheduled for July 2022. These are but some of the key issues my government is now working in our third cycle universal periodic review report to be presented to the Human Rights Council in November of 2021. Mr. President, before I conclude, I would like to reiterate our call on the General Assembly to do better in delivering on the reforms of the United Nations Security Council. This important organ, entrusted with the international community's peace and security, with its archaic representation and working methods, is in dire need of an overhaul to ensure it meets with today's reality. We are concerned that it has been nearly 12 long years now since the first round of the intergovernmental negotiations for the reforms of the Security Council, and the costs keep on escalating for countries like ours. Despite all the extensive efforts on the 5 agreed elements of the IGN package, it still does not have any formal status to this date. For my delegation, a single consolidated document now and not in the indeterminate feature is indeed needed for real negotiations to pave way for the reforms of the Security Council. The importance of this cannot be overstated. We reiterate our call on the fundamental point. I also recognize, as I close, the important reality check by the Secretary General Guterres in his call for action on the common agenda. The Secretary General's proposals and recommendations for call for a robust United Nations system, it has our full support, but we cannot progress the common agenda without dealing with the system that will carry it. And I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me an opportunity to speak. Under your presidency, we hope our planet can be a place and a better place for all. We have a hope that no one will be left behind. God bless you all. God bless our planet Earth. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Bougainville Affairs of the independent state of Papua New Guinea for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.